Part 1. The emergency signal came through in the middle of the night. On every human ship in the sector, alarms started ringing. The message was simple but desperate. A species called the Valori needed help. They were under attack and dying by the thousands. Captain Jake Morrison woke up fast. He had been a soldier for 20 years and his body knew the sound of danger. He reached his command center in less than 3 minutes, still pulling on his uniform jacket. His crew was already at their stations, faces lit by the glow of computer screens. The main display showed the distress call. It had been sent to everyone in the galaxy. The Valori were asking for help from the Galactic Council, the big organization that ran most of known space. They were a peaceful people who had never hurt anyone. Now someone called the Zareth was killing them, destroying their worlds one by one. Lisa Hayes stood next to Jake. She was his second in command and had been with him for 8 years. She knew how he thought and what he would want to see. She pulled up the tactical information without being asked. The numbers were bad. 3 Valori planets had been hit already. Millions were dead. The attacks were getting worse. Jake looked at the communication logs. The Valori had sent their signal 3 days ago. 3 whole days. He checked to see who had responded. The Kranich Empire had sent a message saying they would review the situation. The Thessian coalition said they needed to consult with their military advisors. A dozen other species offered thoughts and prayers, but nothing else. No one was actually coming to help. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was exactly what the human diplomats had warned about. The Galactic Council was good at talking and making rules, but when someone actually needed help, everyone suddenly had reasons to wait. They wanted to be careful, to think things through to make sure they were not making mistakes. Meanwhile, people were dying. Admiral Richard Cole's message arrived 10 minutes later. It was short and direct, the way military orders should be. The 3rd Expeditionary Fleet was to proceed to Valori space immediately. They were authorized to use any force necessary to protect civilian populations. Earth was sending help. Jake allowed himself a small smile. Humanity had only been part of the Galactic Council for 15 years. Most of the older species still treated them like children, like dangerous primitives who did not understand how civilized people behaved. The Council had rules about everything. Rules about trade, about territory, about when you could and could not use weapons. Humans had learned all the rules and followed them carefully. But humans also remembered what happened when good people did nothing. Their own history was full of moments when evil had won because no one stood up fast enough. They had made a promise when they joined the Council. If someone called for help, Earth would answer. It did not matter if it was profitable or convenient. It mattered that it was right. The fleet started moving within the hour. 27 warships, all built by human hands with human ideas about what a military vessel should be. They were not pretty like the Thessian ships with their flowing lines and artistic designs. They were not massive like the Kranich dreadnoughts that tried to win through size alone. Human ships looked like what they were. Weapons designed by people who understood violence. The UNS Valiant was Jake's ship, and he knew every inch of her. She had thick armor plating that could take hits other ships would not survive. She had backup systems for the backup systems. Human engineers assumed that everything would eventually break in combat, so they built ships that could keep fighting even when half destroyed. The weapons were a mix of technologies, some borrowed from alien species and others uniquely human. Missiles, railguns, lasers, and plasma cannons. If one system failed, there were 5 others ready to take over. Greg Palmer ran the weapons department. He was young but had proven himself in fights against pirates and smugglers. He triple-checked every system personally. The Zareth were not going to be like pirates. This would be a real battle against a real military force. Everyone needed to be ready. Down in engineering, the team was pushing the reactors to maximum safe output. Amy Sullivan commanded one of the destroyer escorts, the UNS Relentless. She and her crew were practicing micro-jump procedures, a dangerous maneuver that involved making very short, faster-than-light jumps in the middle of combat. It was risky and required perfect timing. Most alien species thought it was insane. Humans thought it was effective. The journey to Valori space would take 4 days at maximum speed. Jake used that time to drill his crew constantly. They practiced damage control procedures, weapons targeting, and emergency evacuations. The crew complained about the lack of sleep, but they knew why he was pushing them. When the shooting started, training was all that would keep them alive. On the second day, they received updated intelligence. The situation was worse than the initial reports suggested. The Zareth had not just attacked 3 planets. They had attacked and conquered them. The Valori had no military to speak of, just security forces meant for keeping peace among their own people. Against coordinated military assaults with air support and orbital bombardment, the Valori had lasted only hours on each world. Jake studied the combat footage that Valori survivors had managed to transmit. The Zareth fought in standard formations, textbook military tactics that any species in the galaxy would recognize. Their weapons were conventional, their strategies predictable. They were winning through simple, overwhelming force against an opponent who could not fight back. That was going to change. Lisa found Jake in his quarters on the 3rd night. He was reviewing star charts, plotting possible battle scenarios. She brought coffee, real coffee from Earth, not the synthetic stuff from the ship's dispensers. They sat in silence for a while, just 2 soldiers before a battle thinking about what was coming. She asked him if he thought the Council would ever forgive them for acting without permission. Jake shrugged. The Galactic Council had not given authorization for military action. They were still debating and discussing, but human law was clear. The fleet commanders had authority to respond to distress calls without waiting for politicians to make up their minds. It was one of the rules humans had insisted on when joining the Council, and the aliens had agreed because they never thought it would matter. Now it mattered. The 4th day arrived. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Valori home system. What they saw made even experienced soldiers feel sick. Debris filled the space around the planet. Destroyed satellites, broken defense platforms, and the wreckage of civilian ships that had tried to evacuate. The planet itself showed signs of bombardment from orbit. Cities were burning, and holding position around the world like predators circling wounded prey were 6 Zareth dreadnoughts. Jake took a deep breath. Then he gave the order that would change everything. All ships engage the enemy. Part 2, the Zareth had no idea what hit them. One moment they were continuing their methodical destruction of the planet below. The next moment, space around them exploded with weapons fire. Greg Palmer's fingers flew across his console. He had spent years training for this exact scenario. His targeting computers had locked onto all 6 enemy ships simultaneously. The first salvo from the human fleet was coordinated down to the microsecond. Every ship fired at the same instant, and the effect was devastating. The lead Zareth dreadnought took the worst of it. Railgun slugs moving at impossible speeds punched through its shields like they were not even there. The shields were designed to disperse energy weapons, spreading the heat and impact across a wide area. But solid metal traveling at a significant fraction of light speed did not care about energy dispersion. It just smashed through everything in its path. Missiles followed the railgun fire. Hundreds of them, each one independently guided and equipped with its own electronic warfare suite. The Zareth point defense systems tried to shoot them down but were quickly overwhelmed. The missiles were programmed to work together, sacrificing some of themselves to create openings for others. It was a level of coordination that required processing power most species considered excessive for mere weapons. Humans did not believe in simple weapons. Every tool was given enough intelligence to make decisions, enough programming to adapt to changing situations. The missiles knew how to hunt. The first Zareth dreadnought died in less than 40 seconds. Its reactor went critical, and the explosion lit up the entire battlefield. The other 5 Zareth ships tried to respond, tried to bring their own weapons to bear, but they were still trying to understand what was happening. Where had these ships come from? Who were they? The Zareth intelligence reports had said the nearest military response was days away. Jake watched the battle unfold with the calm that came from experience. This was what his crew had trained for. This was why they had drilled until they could operate their stations half asleep. In combat, there was no time to think about what button to push or what procedure to follow. Everything had to be automatic, had to be muscle memory. The second Zareth ship managed to fire back. Its plasma cannons were powerful, designed to melt through heavy armor. The blasts hit 3 human cruisers and damage reports started flooding in immediately. But the human ships did not stop or retreat. They kept advancing, kept firing, shields absorbing what they could and armor taking the rest. This confused the Zareth even more. Normal species retreated when taking damage. It was logical. It was smart. You pulled back, repaired, and engaged again when you had the advantage. But humans were not retreating. They were pushing forward harder, accepting damage in exchange for better firing positions. Amy Sullivan saw her opportunity. The UNS Relentless was a destroyer, smaller and faster than the main battlecruisers. While the Zareth focused on the larger threats, she positioned her ship for a micro-jump. The calculations had to be perfect. Jump coordinates, timing, power allocation. One mistake and her ship would materialize inside a planet or an asteroid, killing everyone instantly. She checked her numbers 3 times in the space of 5 seconds. Then she gave the order. The Relentless vanished from its position and reappeared in the middle of the Zareth formation. For a single frozen moment, Amy's ship was surrounded by enemy dreadnoughts close enough that she could see the details of their hull plating on her view screen. Then she gave the next order, and every weapon on her ship fired at once. At point-blank range, there was no such thing as shields or defense. The Zareth dreadnought next to her simply came apart, torn into pieces by concentrated fire. Amy did not wait to see the results. She had already programmed the next jump, and the Relentless vanished again, appearing safely back with the main human fleet. The Zareth commander was panicking now. He could see it in the way the enemy ships were moving, in the desperate way they were trying to regroup. He was facing an enemy that did not follow the rules, that did not care about conventional tactics. Every time he tried to predict their next move, they did something impossible. 3 more human destroyers repeated Amy's maneuver. Jump in, fire everything, jump out. The Zareth formation collapsed completely. Ships were trying to run now, trying to escape to the edge of the system where they could jump to faster than light and flee. But the human fleet was faster. Human ships had powerful engines because humans assumed you would need to chase enemies who tried to run away. The 3rd Zareth dreadnought exploded. Then the 4th. The 5th managed to make it to the jump point, but was so badly damaged that it fell apart when trying to enter faster than light.
Its hull could not handle the stress.
Only one Zareth ship remained, and it was trying desperately to surrender. Jake ordered his weapons officer to disable it, not destroy it. They needed prisoners. They needed information. The UNS Valiant closed in carefully, targeting the enemy ship's engines and weapons, precise shots carefully placed. In less than a minute, the last Zareth dreadnought was floating dead in space, powerless but intact. The entire battle had lasted 43 minutes. 6 Zareth dreadnoughts had been destroyed or captured. The human fleet had taken damage, some of it serious, but not a single ship had been lost. No one had died, though there were injuries from the combat maneuvers and the hits they had taken. Jake allowed himself to breathe. Then he turned his attention to the planet below. The Valori were broadcasting on all frequencies, desperate messages asking who had saved them. Jake opened a communication channel. His face appeared on every screen across the planet. He introduced himself simply. Captain Jake Morrison of Earth, representing the United Nations Space Force. He told them that humanity had received their distress call and had come to help. His ships were standing by to provide medical aid, supplies, and security. He asked permission to send down landing parties to assist with rescue and recovery operations. There was a long silence from the planet. Jake could imagine what they were thinking. Earth was barely known to most species. Humans were those aggressive primitives from a death world, the ones that made other species uncomfortable at diplomatic meetings. And now humans had just destroyed a force that had terrorized the Valori for weeks. Finally, a response came. It was from Elder Counselor Ven, the leader of the Valori government. His voice was shaky, barely controlled. He gave permission for the humans to land. He asked if there was anything the Valori could do to repay them. Jake's answer was simple and honest. Just survive. That was payment enough. Over the next hours, human ships began landing parties. Medical teams, engineers, security forces. They brought supplies and equipment, including heavy machinery to help dig through rubble and search for survivors. The Valori watched in amazement as humans worked alongside them, lifting debris that the weaker Valori could not move, going into dangerous areas without hesitation. Dr. Chris Bennett set up a field hospital in what had been a school. The Valori medical staff were overwhelmed, dealing with more casualties than they had equipment or training for. Chris showed them how to perform battlefield triage, how to prioritize patients when you could not save everyone. It was harsh knowledge, the kind that peaceful species never wanted to learn, but it saved lives. Lieutenant Karen Foster worked with the Valori government officials, helping them coordinate the recovery effort. She was patient and kind, explaining things in simple terms. The Valori were not stupid, but they had no experience with military operations or disaster response on this scale. Karen taught them, showing them how humans organize such efforts through centuries of dealing with wars and natural disasters. Jake remained in orbit, coordinating the fleet. More Zareth ships might come. His people were ready, but as he watched the rescue operations on the planet below, he felt something shift. The Valori had sent out a call for help to the entire galaxy. The great powers of the Galactic Council had debated and discussed and done nothing. But humans had come. Humans had fought. Humans had won. The galaxy was going to have to reconsider its opinion of Earth, whether it wanted to or not. Part 3 Elder Counselor Ven had lived for 97 years. He had seen his civilization reach the stars and join the Galactic Council. He had witnessed peace and prosperity beyond anything his ancestors could have imagined. But he had never seen anything like the humans. They stood in his council chamber now, 3 of them. Captain Jake Morrison, Commander Lisa Hayes, and Lieutenant Karen Foster. They wore their military uniforms with an ease that spoke of long service. But it was their eyes that unsettled Ven. They were kind eyes, patient eyes, but underneath there was something hard and unyielding. These were people who had seen terrible things and done terrible things and had made peace with both. Ven struggled to understand. The Valori had evolved past violence millennia ago. They settled disputes with discussion and compromise. The very idea of organized warfare was something from their ancient history, studied by scholars but not understood by ordinary people. War was wasteful and cruel, a sign of primitive thinking. Yet these humans had saved his people through violence. Efficient, overwhelming violence that had destroyed the Zareth fleet in less than an hour. How could he reconcile gratitude with the horror of what he had witnessed? Karen seemed to sense his confusion. She spoke gently, explaining that humans understood his feelings. They knew their nature made other species uncomfortable, but that nature was also what allowed them to help when no one else would. The galaxy had many peaceful species, many civilized cultures. But when predators came, civilization needed teeth to defend it. Jake added more context. He explained Earth's history, though he kept it simple. Humans had spent thousands of years fighting each other, wars over land, resources, religion, and ideas that seemed meaningless now. Millions had died in conflicts that should never have happened. But through all that pain, humans had learned lessons. They had learned how to organize, how to fight effectively, how to win. When humanity finally achieved peace on their own world, they had made a choice. They could reject violence entirely, try to become like the peaceful species they met among the stars, or they could accept what they were and use it for something better. They chose the second path. Humans would be the ones who stepped forward when others could not. They would carry the burden of violence so that species like the Valori did not have to. Lisa pulled up information on her portable computer. She showed Ven data about Earth, and the numbers made his blood run cold. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world. The gravity was higher than most inhabited planets. The weather patterns were extreme and unpredictable. The native life was aggressive and competitive. Even the plants on Earth had evolved weapons, thorns, and toxins to defend themselves. Humans had evolved in an environment that was actively trying to kill them. Every day was a struggle for survival. They had become persistence hunters, creatures that could track prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. They had learned to work in groups, to communicate complex ideas, to make plans and tools. Their bodies were dense and durable, built to withstand impacts and injuries that would kill most spacefaring species. Dr. Chris Bennett joined the conversation through a video link from the field hospital. He explained the medical differences in language that Ven could understand. Human bones were twice as dense as Valori bones. Human muscles were stronger and could operate under greater stress. Humans healed faster from injuries and could survive damage that would be fatal to others. They had redundant systems in their bodies just like they built into their ships. But it was not just physical advantages. Ven learned about human pain tolerance, about their ability to keep functioning even when injured. He learned about adrenaline, a chemical their bodies produced in danger that made them faster and stronger for brief periods. He learned about their persistence, their refusal to give up even when logic said they should. Greg Palmer explained the weapon systems, walking Ven through how human military technology worked. It was a strange mix of advanced and primitive concepts. Humans used energy weapons and sophisticated computers, but they also loved simple kinetic weapons, railguns that threw chunks of metal at extreme speeds, missiles that were barely more than guided explosives. Even their energy weapons were designed with a brutal simplicity, focused on damage rather than elegance. The reason was practical. Humans assumed that systems would fail in combat. Complex technology broke down under stress, so they favored weapons that were simple, reliable, and easy to repair. A railgun had few moving parts. If the computer targeting system failed, a human could aim it manually. If the power system was damaged, they could rig up emergency power from almost anything. Human ships were built the same way. Multiple redundant systems, armor thick enough to take hits that would core other vessels. Compartmentalized designs that could seal off damaged sections and keep the rest of the ship functioning. Human engineers planned for catastrophic failure and built ships that could keep fighting even when half destroyed. Ven asked the question that had been bothering him since the battle. Why had the humans fought so aggressively? Why had they taken damage instead of retreating and regrouping? It seemed wasteful, even suicidal. Jake's answer was simple. Speed mattered in combat. The Zareth had been bombarding the planet below. Every minute the battle continued, more Valori were dying. So humans had accepted risk and damage to end the fight quickly. The goal was not to preserve human ships. The goal was to save Valori lives. The math was brutal but clear. Better some damage to human vessels than thousands more Valori deaths. This shocked Ven more than anything else. Humans would sacrifice themselves for strangers? For people they had never met, whose culture they barely understood. Why, Lisa tried to explain. She talked about human history, about the times when people had stood by and done nothing while terrible things happened, the times when evil had won because good people did not act fast enough. Humanity had learned from those failures. They had decided that action, even imperfect action, was better than cautious inaction. There was also practical strategy. Jake elaborated on this point. The galaxy was full of peaceful species who avoided conflict. That created a vacuum. A space where aggressive powers could operate without challenge. If humans wanted to live in a stable galaxy, they needed to show that aggression had consequences. The Zareth had attacked a peaceful species, assuming no one would respond effectively. They had been wrong. Now every potential aggressor in the galaxy would think twice. Karen added the diplomatic perspective. Earth wanted to be part of the Galactic Council, wanted to trade and exchange knowledge with other species. But humans had been treated as outsiders, as dangerous primitives to be managed rather than respected. By responding to the Valori distress call, humanity was proving its value. They were showing that Earth could be a reliable ally, the kind of friend you wanted in a crisis. Ven felt overwhelmed by all this information. He had thought he understood the galaxy, understood how civilized species behaved. Humans were forcing him to reconsider everything. They were violent, yes. But they were also principled. They had rules and codes they followed strictly. They believed in protecting the weak, in standing up to bullies, in making the hard choices that others avoided. The more he learned, the more he realized that humans were not primitive at all. They were simply different. They had evolved in hell and had learned to thrive there. Now they were bringing those lessons to the stars. Ven made a decision. He formally thanked the humans for their aid and asked what the Valori could do to repay them. Jake's answer remained the same as before. Just survive and remember. Remember that when the Valori called for help, it was Earth that answered. Part 4, the Zareth Supreme Commander, was not accustomed to failure. His name was Krell, and he had led victorious campaigns on 17 worlds. He had built his reputation on careful planning and overwhelming force. The defeat at Valori Prime should not have been possible. He studied the combat data from the surviving ship for the 10th time. 6 dreadnoughts destroyed by an unknown force in 43 minutes. The sensor log showed the attackers were human vessels from a planet called Earth. Krell accessed the Zareth military database. Earth was listed as a minor power, barely worth noting. The assessment was clearly wrong. Krell called his staff together. They needed to understand what had happened and plan an appropriate response. The intelligence officer reported that Earth was indeed a minor member of the Galactic Council, with limited territory and a small fleet. They were newcomers to space, having achieved faster-than-light travel only a few decades ago. They should not have been capable of defeating a Zareth battle group. The tactical officer had analyzed the combat footage more carefully. What he found was disturbing. The humans fought with a level of coordination that suggested extensive combat experience. Their weapons were crude in some ways, but devastatingly effective. They used kinetic weapons that bypassed shields, missiles with advanced guidance systems, and tactics that were unpredictable and aggressive. But what bothered the tactical officer most was the human willingness to take damage. They had accepted hits that should have forced them to retreat, then kept fighting as if nothing had happened. One human destroyer had materialized inside the Zareth formation, an insane maneuver that risked instant destruction. It was not the act of a cautious, civilized species. It was the act of warriors who cared more about winning than surviving. Krell made his decision. The humans had gotten lucky, had caught his forces by surprise, but the Zareth Empire did not accept defeat. He would gather a larger force, ensure proper intelligence, and crush this upstart species. Then he would finish what he had started with the Valori. The galaxy needed to remember that the Zareth were not to be trifled with. 2 weeks later, Krell returned to Valori space with 34 capital ships and over 100 support vessels. It was the largest fleet the Zareth had deployed in a decade. Surely no force could stand against such power. What Krell did not know was that humanity had anticipated exactly this response. Admiral Richard Cole had reinforced the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet with ships from 2 other battle groups. Now 60 human warships waited in Valori space, and they had spent the past 2 weeks preparing for the Zareth return. Captain Kevin Drake commanded the UNS Thunderbolt, a stealth ship equipped with the latest reconnaissance technology. His vessel had been shadowing the Zareth fleet for 3 days as it approached the system. Every enemy ship had been identified and catalogued. Every formation weakness had been noted. When Krell's fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel, they believed they were launching a surprise attack. They were completely wrong. The humans struck first. Long-range kinetic bombardment, massive tungsten rods accelerated to a fraction of light speed. They had been positioned days ago, waiting in carefully calculated orbits. When the Zareth fleet arrived, the rods were already falling. Krell watched in horror as 4 of his carrier ships were torn apart before his forces could even raise shields. The battle began in chaos. Krell tried to organize his ships to bring order to the confusion. But the humans were not giving him time. They were everywhere at once, hitting from multiple angles, using the debris from the destroyed carriers as cover. Their smaller ships darted between his larger vessels, too fast to target effectively. Admiral Cole watched the battle from his flagship, the UNS Independence. He had studied every battle the Zareth had ever fought, read every report, analyzed every tactic. He knew how they thought, how they organized, what they would try to do, and he had prepared counters for all of it. The Zareth tried to form a defensive sphere, a standard formation that provided mutual support and overlapping fields of fire. Human destroyers responded with microjumps, appearing inside the formation and firing at point-blank range before vanishing. The sphere collapsed as ships tried to avoid hitting each other while targeting the human raiders. Captain Nicole Gardner commanded the UNS Defiant. Her ship took a direct plasma hit that melted through the port armor and destroyed 3 decks. Damage control teams struggled to contain the fires and seal the breaches. Nicole looked at the tactical display and made a calculation. Her ship was dying, but she could make that death count for something. She ordered the crew to the escape pods. Most of them made it out in time. Then she locked the controls and aimed her crippled vessel at the Zareth command ship. Full power to engines, all remaining weapons firing continuously. The Defiant accelerated like a missile, leaving a trail of debris and atmosphere behind it. Krell saw the human ship coming. He ordered evasive maneuvers, but his dreadnought was too large and slow to dodge. He watched in frozen terror as the Defiant smashed into his ship at full combat speed. The impact was catastrophic. Both vessels exploded in a fireball that could be seen from the planet below. Nicole's sacrifice was not in vain. The Zareth command structure collapsed with their flagship destroyed. Individual captains tried to take charge, but there was no unified response. Some ships tried to continue fighting. Others attempted to retreat. The confusion spread through the Zareth fleet like a virus. Human ships pressed their advantage mercilessly. They had trained for this. They knew how to exploit disorder, how to target ships that were isolated or confused. The battle turned into a slaughter, though the humans gave the Zareth every opportunity to surrender. Many chose to fight anyway and died for that choice. Jake Morrison led a squadron against a group of Zareth cruisers trying to bomb the planet below. His ships formed a wall between the enemy and the Valori world. When the Zareth tried to shoot past them at the civilian targets, the human vessels simply absorbed the fire. Their shields held. Their armor held. And while the Zareth wasted ammunition on human ships, those ships returned fire with devastating precision. The UNS Valiant took 17 direct hits. Alarms rang across every deck. Engineering reported critical damage to the main reactor. Lisa Hayes coordinated the damage control teams with calm efficiency, even as explosions rocked the ship around her. They would hold. They always held. That was what human ships did. Greg Palmer's console showed 4 Zareth cruisers still in the fight. His own weapons were damaged, operating at 60% capacity. He adjusted his targeting, compensating for the reduced firepower. 4 more missiles away. 2 railgun shots. He watched the projectiles track across his display. Watched them hit. 1 Zareth ship exploded. 2 more went dark, disabled. The 4th tried to run, but Amy Sullivan's destroyer cut it off and forced its surrender. 6 hours into the battle, Krell's replacement commander ordered a general retreat. 11 of the original 34 capital ships remained operational. The rest were debris or captured hulks floating dead in space. The human fleet had lost 9 vessels completely destroyed, including the Defiant. Nicole Gardner's crew had been recovered, but she had gone down with her ship. She would be remembered as a hero. Admiral Cole did not pursue the retreating Zareth. He had made his point. The message was clear enough. Attack Valori space and you fight humanity. And humanity did not lose. Let the survivors carry that message back to their empire. On the planet below, the Valori watched the battle through their orbital sensors. They saw the Zareth fleet, so much larger than before, get torn apart by the human defenders. They saw human ships take terrible damage but refuse to break. They saw one human captain sacrifice herself and her vessel to kill the enemy commander. They were witnessing something their species had forgotten. Warriors fighting not for conquest or glory, but for duty. Part 5. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Humanity, the species most considered barely civilized, had defeated the Zareth Empire twice. The second battle had been even more decisive than the first. The Zareth had brought overwhelming force, and humans had crushed them anyway. On the Kranich homeworld, military analysts gathered in emergency sessions. The Kranich prided themselves on having the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. Their dreadnoughts were the largest ships ever built, mobile fortresses that could destroy entire fleets. But now they were looking at combat data from the Valori system and asking uncomfortable questions. General Vax was the senior military commander for the Kranich Empire. He had served for 40 years and commanded fleets in 3 major conflicts. He understood warfare better than most species in the galaxy. As he studied the human tactics, he felt something he rarely experienced: concern. The humans fought like nothing he had ever seen. They were aggressive to the point of recklessness, but that aggression was backed by solid training and excellent coordination. They took risks that no Kranich commander would accept, but those risks were calculated. Every time a human ship exposed itself to danger, there were 3 more covering it, ready to exploit any opening created by the enemy's response. But what really worried Vax was the human willingness to accept casualties. One of their captains had deliberately crashed her ship into an enemy flagship. It was not desperation. It was tactical thinking. She had recognized that her vessel was dying and had chosen to make that death meaningful. The psychological impact on the Zareth fleet had been devastating, leading directly to their defeat. The Kranich fought to win, but they also valued the lives of their soldiers. They would retreat and regroup rather than accept heavy losses. But humans seemed to view their own lives as just another resource to be spent in pursuit of victory. That made them dangerous in a way that transcended simple military power. Vax sent a recommendation to the Kranich Council: establish formal military ties with Earth, invite human observers to Kranich war games, learn from them before circumstances forced the lesson to be taught the hard way. The council debated for 3 hours before agreeing. An official invitation was sent to Earth. The Thessian coalition responded differently. They had always believed their ships were the finest in the galaxy. Thessian vessels were beautiful, designed with aesthetic principles as important as military function. Their weapons were elegant solutions to complex problems. Thessian commanders prided themselves on fighting smart rather than brutal. Counselor Talia reviewed the battle reports with growing frustration. The human ships were ugly, blocky things with no artistic merit whatsoever. Their tactics were crude, their weapons simple. They should not have been able to defeat a force like the Zareth. Yet they had. Twice. What did that say about Thessian military philosophy? Her military advisor, Commander Shen, offered a painful truth. The Thessians had forgotten that war was ultimately about breaking things and killing people. They had refined it into an art form, but in doing so, they had lost sight of its fundamental nature. Humans understood war as it truly was, ugly, brutal, and effective. Their ships might not be beautiful, but they accomplished their purpose better than vessels twice their size. Talia made a difficult decision. She recommended that the coalition purchase several human ship designs and study their construction principles. The recommendation caused an uproar among traditional Thessians who saw it as abandoning their cultural identity. But Talia persisted. Cultural identity was meaningless if you lost wars. Better to adapt and survive than remain pure and die. Smaller species throughout the galaxy watched these developments with interest. For decades, they had been at the mercy of larger powers. The Galactic Council provided some protection, but ultimately might made right in galactic politics. Now there was a new power rising, one that seemed genuinely committed to protecting the weak. Ambassador Helen Carter from Earth found herself suddenly popular at council meetings. Representatives who had previously ignored her now sought her out for private conversations. They asked carefully worded questions about human military capabilities, about Earth's intentions, about whether humanity might be interested in mutual defense agreements. Helen was smart enough to recognize opportunity when it appeared. Earth wanted stability in the galaxy, wanted to be seen as a reliable partner rather than a dangerous outsider. She began negotiating defense pacts with smaller species, always emphasizing that Earth expected nothing in return except friendship and fair trade. The species that signed these agreements found that human protection was remarkably effective. Pirates who had raided shipping for years suddenly stopped operating anywhere near human allies. Back on Earth, the impact of the Valori campaign was profound. The news broadcast showed footage of the battles, of human ships fighting against overwhelming odds to protect strangers. They showed the rescue operations, human soldiers working alongside Valori civilians to dig through rubble and search for survivors. They showed Captain Nicole Gardner's sacrifice, her ship flying into the enemy flagship to save the people below. Recruitment for the United Nations Space Force reached levels not seen since the first contact with alien species. Young people lined up at recruiting stations, wanting to be part of something bigger than themselves. The recruiters were careful to explain the reality. Space combat was dangerous. Many who joined would never see action, spending years maintaining equipment or running logistics. But those who did fight might die like Nicole had died. The recruits understood. They came anyway. There was something appealing about humanity's new role in the galaxy. They were not conquerors or merchants. They were defenders, protectors, the people who showed up when others needed help. It was a purpose that resonated with something deep in the human spirit. Captain Jake Morrison received a promotion to fleet commander. He would oversee an entire battle group, multiple ships working together. Lisa Hayes took command of the UNS Valiant, his old ship. She stood on the bridge where she had served as second-in-command for so many years, and she felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. The ship had been repaired after the second battle. New armor plating covered the damage. New systems replaced what had been destroyed. But the crew remained the same, and they knew their new captain well. Lisa did not make a speech or try to inspire them with words. She simply got to work, running drills and preparing for the next crisis. Because there would be a next crisis. There always was. Admiral Richard Cole gave an interview to a journalist from the Galactic News Network. The journalist asked why humanity had responded to the Valori distress call when no one else had. Cole's answer was simple and direct. Because it was the right thing to do. The journalist pressed for more explanation. Surely there were strategic considerations, political advantages, economic benefits. Cole shook his head. All of those things might be true, but they were not why humanity had acted. Humans helped because people needed help. It was not more complicated than that. The interview was broadcast across the galaxy. Most species did not know what to make of it. In galactic politics, everyone had ulterior motives. Species did not risk their own people for strangers without expecting something in return. Yet here was a human admiral claiming exactly that. Either he was lying, or humans genuinely thought differently than everyone else. Elder Counselor Venn watched the interview from his office on the Valori homeworld. The reconstruction was going well. Human engineers had brought in heavy equipment and expertise. The bombed cities were being rebuilt with better infrastructure than before. Valori, who had lost everything, were finding hope again. Venn had spent long hours thinking about what had happened. His people had learned a hard lesson. Peace was only possible when someone was willing to enforce it. The Valori could not do that themselves. But humans could and would. It was not the future he had imagined, relying on warriors from a death world for protection, but it was better than the alternative. He sent a message to Earth to be delivered to Admiral Cole personally. It was a simple thank you, but Venn tried to express everything he felt: gratitude for the lives saved, respect for the sacrifice made, and a promise that the Valori would never forget what humanity had done for them. When Earth needed friends in the galaxy, the Valori would be there. Part 6. 5 years had passed since the Valori campaign. The galaxy had changed in ways both obvious and subtle. Humanity's role had evolved from outsider to essential partner in galactic security. But the real transformation was in how species thought about peace and safety. Lisa Hayes now commanded a much larger force than the single ship she had started with. Her battle group consisted of 12 vessels, all positioned near the border of what had once been contested space. The Zareth Empire had collapsed after their defeats at Valori. Internal factions had torn it apart, each claiming the right to rule. The resulting chaos had threatened to spill into neighboring systems, but it had not. Human peacekeeping forces had established a buffer zone, preventing the various Zareth factions from dragging others into their civil war. It was delicate work, requiring more diplomacy than firepower. Lisa spent most of her time negotiating with faction leaders, convincing them that cooperation was better than continued fighting. She had learned a lot in 5 years. War was easy compared to peace. In battle, the objectives were clear: destroy the enemy, protect the innocent. But in peacekeeping, everything was complicated. Every faction believed they were right. Every group had legitimate grievances. Finding solutions that everyone could accept required patience and creativity. Her communications officer, a young woman named Beth Clark, brought news from Earth Command. The Galactic Council was holding an emergency session. A new crisis had emerged in the outer regions. A species called the Morgoth were expanding aggressively, conquering systems and enslaving populations. The Council needed to decide how to respond. Lisa knew what would happen. The Council would debate and discuss. Committees would form to study the problem. Diplomatic channels would be explored. Meanwhile, people would suffer and die, unless humanity acted first. Again, she sent a message to Admiral Cole, now the supreme commander of all human space forces. Her recommendation was clear: deploy forces to the threatened region immediately. Do not wait for Council authorization. Save lives first, deal with politics later. Admiral Cole's response came back within an hour. He agreed. The 5th and 7th fleets were already mobilizing. On Earth, the political landscape had shifted significantly. The United Nations had transformed into a more centralized government, necessary for coordinating humanity's expanded role in galactic affairs. President Sarah Kim addressed the General Assembly, explaining why Earth needed to respond to the Morgoth threat even without Council approval. Her speech was broadcast not just to Earth, but to every human colony and ship in space. She talked about responsibility, about how power came with obligations. Humanity had the ability to help, which meant they had the duty to help. Other species might calculate costs and benefits. Humans simply acted when action was needed. The speech resonated with the public. Opinion polls showed overwhelming support for military intervention. But there were dissenting voices too. Some argued that humanity was taking on too much, that they should focus on their own interests rather than being the galaxy's police force. The debate was healthy and necessary. Democratic societies needed such discussions. Jake Morrison had retired from active military service. He now taught at the Naval Academy, training the next generation of officers. His classes were always full, students eager to learn from the hero of Valori. But Jake did not like that title. He had done his duty, nothing more. The real heroes were people like Nicole Gardner, who had given everything. One of his students, a bright young man named Peter Wright, asked a question that Jake had been expecting. Was it right for humanity to impose their values on the galaxy? Who decided that humans should be the enforcers of peace? Jake's answer was carefully considered. Humans did not impose anything. They offered protection to those who wanted it, and left alone those who did not. The difference was consent. Species chose to ally with Earth, they were not forced, but Peter pressed further. What about species who refused human help but still suffered under oppression? Did humanity just watch? Jake admitted this was the hardest question. Sometimes, yes, you had to watch. Sovereignty mattered, but humans also offered asylum, accepted refugees, provided support that did not require military intervention. There were many ways to help beyond sending warships. Ambassador Helen Carter found herself in a strange position. 5 years ago, other diplomats had ignored her. Now she was one of the most influential people in the Galactic Council. Her support or opposition could determine whether proposals passed or failed. Smaller species looked to her for leadership. Even the major powers consulted with her before making decisions. She used that influence carefully. Earth did not want to dominate the Council, just to make it more effective. She pushed for reforms that would allow faster responses to crises. She advocated for a permanent peacekeeping force, one not dependent on individual species contributing ships when they felt like it. Progress was slow, but it was happening. The Valori had become some of humanity's closest allies. Their society had changed after the Zarath attacks. They understood now that peace required protection. With human assistance, they had built a modest military force, enough to defend themselves against minor threats. More importantly, they had become advocates for collective security, arguing that species should help each other rather than waiting for crises to resolve themselves. Elder Counselor Venn had passed away 2 years ago, but his successor, Counselor Mira, continued his policies. She visited Earth for the memorial service honoring those who had died defending Valori space. Standing before the monument to Captain Nicole Gardner, Mira spoke about sacrifice and duty. Her words were translated into dozens of languages and broadcast across the galaxy. She said that the Valori had learned what true civilization meant. It was not just art and culture and peaceful philosophy. It was also the willingness to stand against evil, to protect those who could not protect themselves. The Valori could not become warriors like humans. Their nature would not allow it. But they could support those warriors, provide them with resources and friendship and gratitude. The Morgath crisis unfolded over several months. Human forces arrived before the Council finished debating. They established defensive positions around threatened worlds and opened communication channels with the Morgath leadership. The message was simple and clear: stop the expansion or face military consequences. The Morgath tested human resolve, attacking a small colony world protected by only 3 human ships. It was a mistake. Those 3 ships held off the Morgath fleet for 6 hours until reinforcements arrived. Then the humans counterattacked, destroying half the Morgath attack force and capturing the rest. The Morgath leadership requested negotiations shortly after. Admiral Cole led the negotiations personally. The Morgath were aggressive but not stupid. They recognized when they faced a superior force. The resulting treaty established new borders and included provisions for monitoring compliance. Human ships would patrol the region for the next decade, ensuring the Morgath kept their word. Critics on Earth complained about the cost. Maintaining fleets across the galaxy was expensive. Soldiers were dying in conflicts that did not directly threaten human worlds. Why should Earth pay this price? President Kim addressed these concerns in a press conference. She explained that isolated problems became everyone's problems if ignored long enough. Better to stop aggression early than wait until it arrived at your doorstep. She also pointed out the benefits. Human colonies had access to trade routes that were safe because of military protection. Human businesses operated across the galaxy without fear of piracy or arbitrary restrictions. Human citizens could travel anywhere knowing that if trouble arose, help would come. The costs were real, but so were the advantages. Lisa Hayes received word that she was being promoted to admiral. She would take command of an entire sector, overseeing multiple battle groups and coordinating with local governments. It was a huge responsibility, but she felt ready. She had learned from Jake, from Richard Cole, from Nicole Gardner's example. She understood what humanity's role had become and why it mattered. On her last day commanding the battle group, Her crew threw a small celebration. They gave her a gift, a painting of the UNS Valiant during the second battle at Valori. The ship was damaged but still fighting, weapons firing as enemy vessels surrounded it. Underneath was a quote that had become informal motto of the human fleet. "We stand between the darkness and the light." Lisa looked at the painting for a long time. It captured something essential about humanity's journey to the stars. They had not sought glory or conquest. They had simply decided that someone needed to be willing to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. It was a heavy burden, one that came with pain and loss, but it was also a purpose worth having. Across the galaxy, other species were adapting to the new reality. Some resented human power and worked to limit it. Others embraced humanity as essential partners in maintaining order. Most simply accepted that the galaxy had changed and adjusted accordingly. The age of passive councils and endless debates was ending. Action mattered more than words, and humans were very good at action. Jake Morrison watched all this from his retirement, teaching students and writing his memoirs. He had never wanted to be famous, never sought recognition.